everyone, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of William Henry Harrison, and the focus is victory and sideline. The year is 1813, it's the summer, and the American forces under General William Henry Harrison doing battle with the British and their Indian allies during the War of 1812 in the Northwest Territory. They had recovered from a setback at the Battle of the River Raisin. They had withstood a siege at Fort Meigs, but now they were looking to take the offensive, to pursue their offensive charge to try to capture Detroit, that critical city that the British held right on the border between Canada and the United States. If they could do that, they could potentially kick the British out of the entire region of Upper Canada, and this part of the theater of war would be secured. But this was not going to be easy, in large part because of the British Navy's control of Lake Erie, the other path to get to Detroit. The American Navy had been building ships throughout the last year under Commodore Oliver Perry, but he was short on men, they were inexperienced in the region, and at the time they were actually penned in. Even their new ships were penned in by the British and Commander Robert Barclay. Barclay, though, had to resupply. He was running out of provisions, he had to resupply, he took his ships away, but he wasn't that concerned because Perry and his ships were trapped behind a giant sandbar, and Barclay didn't think he could get out. Well, the Americans had another idea in mind, a pretty fascinating engineering feat where they took every ounce of weight off of all of these ships, including all the artillery and provisions, and they rigged up a mechanism to actually lift all of these ships over the sandbar, put them into open water, and all of a sudden, the Americans had an opportunity to control the lake. They found where Barclay and his men were being supplied at what was called Put-in Bay, and they initiated a blockade around Put-in Bay at the time. Well, in August of 1813, General Harrison, in charge of the land forces in the region, came and joined Perry on his flagship, the Lawrence, where they had a conference about potential battle plans and attack strategy. Perry could also benefit from Harrison bringing along 100 men to try to fill out his ships, fill out his ranks for when this battle was sure to come. And sure enough, that battle on the Lake Erie came in about a month later when Commodore Barclay actually tried to escape this blockade that Perry had put into place, and the battle for Lake Erie was on. Barclay had at his command 6 ships and 64 guns. The Americans under Perry had 9 ships, but only 54 guns. So a little bit more in terms of number of ships, a little less in terms of artillery and firepower. It was a poor start for the Americans. Perry's flagship, the Lawrence, was put out of commission early. He lost a majority of his men, but not himself. He got into a small craft and was rowed over to another American warship, the Niagara, and he was holding out his famous sign, "Don't give up the ship," rallying his men. And when he caught a break, he answered it. The break was that the 2 lead British vessels got entangled, and Perry went at it. He went after both of them immediately, broadsides from both sides of his ship. He put both of those vessels out of commission, and in pretty short order, all 6 ships in the Navy fleet of the British were either captured or destroyed. Lake Erie was now in the hands of the Americans, and Commodore Perry sent off his handwritten note to General Harrison proclaiming, "We have met the enemy and they are ours." Just like that, the entire tone of the battle in the War of 1812 in the Northwest Theater had suddenly changed. The British commander, General Henry Proctor, and his Indian chief ally Tecumseh made the joint decision that they could no longer have their forward position, and they fell back to Detroit, that they thought they could actually defend to figure out what to do next now that they no longer had control of Lake Erie. Well, without the lake, they realized that they weren't going to be able to hold Detroit, so Proctor ordered a full retreat. In the meantime, General Harrison got a big bunch of reinforcements as Governor Isaac Shelby showed up with 3,500 Kentucky militiamen, so now he's got a major force figuring out what to do next. First of all, they went to Detroit. Harrison gave the opportunity to Colonel Richard Johnson to ride in and raise that American flag with Detroit now in American hands, Johnson being the future vice president of the United States. And now they figured out what are they going to do about Proctor, who was off retreating and had about a 3-day head start. Harrison called a council of war to figure out would they chase Proctor by land or actually use Perry's vessels and try to get in front of them by the lake. And eventually they weighed the pros and cons. They decided to go by land. They thought that with Proctor's group being so large and also with a lot of baggage and civilians, sort of hangers-on to go with his 800 soldiers and the 2,000 Indians, they were convinced that they could catch Proctor, and sure enough, the speed advantage was to the Americans. As Proctor and his men and his civilians and baggage were slowly rolling along, the Americans raced 25 miles in the first day, and they were quickly catching up. Proctor and Tecumseh finally realized they were not going to be able to outrun the Americans. They chose to make a stand at a small swamp near the Thames River, near Moravian Town. Now, there was no high ground to build a defensive spot, but they did have natural barriers on both flanks, and this is where they waited for the moment of truth on October 5th of 1813. General Harrison realized his only option was going to be a direct assault. That first assault was not going to be easy. His strategy was wait for the British to fire first on that first volley, and then as soon as that happened, charge immediately on the left and right at the same time with mounted forces at full speed. According to Harrison and his strategy, I determined to refuse my left to the Indians and to break the British lines by a charge. The measure was not sanctioned by anything I had seen or heard of, but I was fully convinced it would succeed. The American backwoodsmen ride better in the woods than any other people. And sure enough, when this happened, the British left crumbled immediately. The Indians on the right actually held out much longer, but ultimately could not withstand the American force. Now, one person who wouldn't be around for all this was General Henry Proctor. He actually escaped at the beginning of the battle. He didn't stick around. He was eventually court-martialed later, but he did make it to his own freedom. Tecumseh, on the other hand, a strong and mighty warrior for the Indians, he stuck it out to his last. He died at the Battle of Thames, fighting alongside his Indian colleagues. This was a total victory for the Americans and William Henry Harrison. It was a 3-day fight. It was, again, complete victory for the Americans, where those British who weren't killed were all captured. And the nation celebrated as the Americans now had control of this entire region of Upper Canada. In Virginia, the Richmond Compiler wrote, talking about Harrison, his cautious and cool, deliberate valor inspire universal confidence and point him out to be the safe as well as able conductor of our armies. The public opinion is very much in his favor. Will designate him for the conqueror of Canada. William Henry Harrison was riding high at the top of his game, but he was about to be sidelined. Harrison took his men next to Fort George on the Niagara River, where he was going to support General George McClure in a battle against the British. When out of the blue, he got orders to report to Secretary of War John Armstrong at Sackett's Harbor. When they got together, Armstrong essentially sent Harrison home. He was still notionally in charge of the army in this region, but he was not going to be permitted to actually operate from the front in the fields of battle. This was an odd decision. It wasn't really explained, although most have conjectured that Armstrong, who had a lot of political ambition on his own, all of a sudden saw Harrison as a potential competitor for future vice presidential or presidential aspirations. And so Armstrong was seen effectively sidelining Harrison, potentially just because he was going to be a political opponent in some future election. Well, things then got worse because Armstrong didn't just be satisfied with putting Harrison off to the side. He started issuing orders directly to the troops under Harrison's command. And Harrison said, "We can't do this. This is not how it works. You're the civilian, you give me the orders, and then I will give the orders to the military." Harrison was caught off guard by this. He felt disrespected, and he wrote a letter, a stern letter to the Secretary of War that apart from considerations of duty to my country, I have no earthly inducement to remain in the army, and if the prerogatives of my rank and situation be taken from me, I should much rather retire to private life. What did Armstrong do? He continued to do the same thing. He continued to give orders directly to the troops under Harrison's command. Now, they didn't want to follow those orders. They were put in a tough spot, asking Harrison what should they do. Well, they weren't going to have that problem anymore because General William Henry Harrison resigned. May 11, 1814, he resigned his commission. The war continued, but it was without William Henry Harrison, the hero of Tippecanoe, the hero of the Thames, the conqueror of Canada. His military career was suddenly over. And that is William Henry Harrison and Victory and Sidelined, from the life of William Henry Harrison. For more presidential chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles.